Welcome to the Dawn Jarvis Show with Dawn Jarvis, the diverse nurse. And in this podcast, we will be talking about healthcare, self-care, diversity, careers, and well-being from a Black woman's perspective. We're really happy that you're here. So if you're ready, let's get on with the show.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Dawn Jarvis Show. I'm Dawn Jarvis, the diverse nurse, and in this podcast we talk to and about busy leaders, professionals and business owners about who they are and what they do and why they do it and how they prioritize their own health and well-being to stay focused, positive and productive. Today I'm delighted to be joined by the wonderful Dr Elizabeth Eyitayo. We met on Clubhouse actually, and we did some rooms together. We did a room called Navigating the NHS, which is brilliant, and we are very good friends. And today, Dr. Elizabeth is going to talk to us about how personal finance management and how it helps burnout prevention. We're going to learn about why personal finance is important in burnout prevention, the key responsibilities of employers, managers, and leaders, and the key actions for us as individuals and as employees. So, Dr. Elizabeth is a general practitioner, personal finance expert, and she's the founder of Medics on Fire, a social and educational initiative designed to help healthcare professionals achieve financial independence and retire empowered. She helps healthcare professionals sort out their personal finances and create multiple streams of income while they are still working. Dr. Elizabeth, this is very impressive. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Hi, Dawn. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be a part of the conversation today. Thank you so much. And you have such an impressive portfolio as well. So really excited just to have this conversation with you today.
You are very welcome. It's really great to have you on the show. So you are a GP. You are, I would say, a serial entrepreneur. You've got lots of irons in the fire. You do courses, you support people, and you work as a GP. How did you get here? Now, tell me about who you are, why you do it, and what motivates you. How did you get here?
Thank you so much. So I think I've always been quite entrepreneurial, primarily because of the influence of my mom and the church that I grew up in, where we were always pushed to kind of really go for our dreams and achieve in every sphere of life. I always wanted to be a doctor, so it was always my passion. Probably since I was about 10 years old, I knew for definite I was going to be a doctor. And I followed through the career ladder as you would expect. But every so often, the opportunities that opened up to me around commissioning, around leadership, and also around publishing my own work allowed me to be able to develop quite a lot of skills. So currently I'm a GP working in North London. I also just recently completed terms on 2 boards. One of the boards, I was an exec lead for transformation and primary care. So clinical lead, exec clinical lead for that on that board. And the second role, I was a governing body GP member. So we were elected members onto the board and responsible for essentially being kind of the primary care voice on those particular boards. And it was great. It was a really, time of transformation. It was a time of growth, time of learning. As part of development for that, I did quite a bit of training with the King's Fund, the Leadership Academy of the NHS Leadership Academy. And I was able to kind of get a lot of skills and kind of evolve and develop myself. And during that time was when I actually started Azil Medical as kind of the parent for Medics on Fire. And Azil Medical, sure.
Yeah, so tell me about Medics on Fire, because that's a brilliant name for a start. And so where did you get that name? Because I love the hot analogy around it. So tell us about Medics on Fire and what that does. How does that serve people?
So that's what most people tend to think of, is that fire. And I like the double wordplay there. It's the fire. So they're on fire, they're hot. But actually for me, it was really around healthcare professionals achieving financial independence, retiring empowered. So there is a movement that's financial independence, retire early. But for us, it's about financial independence, retire empowered. And because in the recruitment agency, I found that a lot of healthcare professionals didn't necessarily have the access as a leader and employer, the access to financial education. They didn't understand themselves, the contracts that they were being given. So it almost evolved in which I was actually given not just mandatory training, as you know, we have to give in the NHS, but also training around personal finance, around budgeting, around understanding your contracts, even the contracts that I was given them, and their pay. And I found there was such a huge gap in people just understanding their pay, understanding their pension contributions. And we started to support people around that. And then last August, I really solidified this concept of helping healthcare professionals achieve financial independence, because I saw the pandemic made that underlying lack of financial literacy even worse, and it just brought it out to the front even more.
I'm loving this. This is great. So I just need to tell the audience that Dr. Elizabeth and I share, and we never worked together, but we worked in the same actual region, and we share a history around commissioning healthcare and working with doctors in primary care and work and contributing to the health of populations. And I am absolutely loving what you said, because there is and around commissioning health service anyway, I think there is a lack of understanding, even with the people in the service, about what that actually looks like, and around that actually services are provided within a contract and that has to be delivered. And that as employees, or I was an employee, you still are, that we're actually part of what that delivery of services. So whether you're working in a hospital or working in the community, you are part of that contract that is being delivered. And I really like what you're saying about the impacts, although I don't like it, obviously, around the pandemic, showing how, how people who were quite vulnerable, so maybe they're independent practitioners or, agency workers, are quite vulnerable to circumstances. And the pandemic was it's like a almost unfathomable event when it's from a risk point of view, but it did happen. It also, and for me, and I think for the people that you've worked with, it actually showed, so what if the worst does happen, how financially secure am I? Because I know that I thought about things like, how am I going to pay my mortgage? How long am I going to pay the mortgage for? Am I going to be well enough to work? And, particularly if I'm outside the framework of being an NHS employee, and what does that look like? And I think people do need to have those conversations around that before they get to a point where it's an emergency and they have to do something quite drastic. So really liking, and I also like that the fact that you sort of evolved into it, you saw a need and then met the need for healthcare professionals. So it must be really rewarding, because I know you've been doing it since last August, like you said. So you're just over a year on. How are things now?
So I think definitely the understanding around financial literacy, or the need for financial education, is growing. So there was a couple of things that you mentioned there around the impact of the pandemic. So definitely what we found, not just necessarily in healthcare professionals, but we found with the pandemic, is people's financial resilience. That's your ability to be able to cope should something like this happen. We found obviously more people are nearing that poverty line. More people struggled a lot more, particularly those who might work as contractors or locum. And what a number of people might not know in the health service is that, especially around that time, a lot of people were already working as either full-time in substantive contract, but then supporting and buffeting their income with some locum and contractual work to be able to make ends meet anyway. And then of course, with the closing of wards and our redirection of deployment into certain areas, it meant that people weren't necessarily getting those incomes. Just one tiny thing, nursing times, actually, it was around end of 2019. So again, we didn't know the pandemic was on the horizon. There was actually something in nursing news around a number of nurses struggling to pay their bills.
Yeah.
And Switch looked to utility bills, and it said about 81% of emergency workers, including nurses, firefighters, were struggling to actually pay their bills as a result of pay conditions. So I think some of these things were happening anyway. But then the fact that the pandemic happened just brought it out to the fore. It made people reflect more. So when you say, where are we now? I think we're definitely in a place where people are reflecting and are beginning to think to themselves, you know what can I do to make sure that I'm making ends meet? And definitely, what can I do to make sure that I don't run myself into burnout, which is the that we obviously will be talking a bit more about today's session.
So I wanted to ask a couple of things. That is so true. So yes, I did know that actually at that amount of time there were discussions around, you know, the salaries of nurses. So I can talk about nurses, but it's absolutely relevant to other healthcare professionals and frontline workers around whether they needed to do extra jobs just to make ends meet. I know that when I was a young girl, you know, I worked 7 days a week to afford my mortgage, and you know, so I did my full-time job and did agency working on top of that just to afford my mortgage, and you know, and there's no reason why that would be any different now. So I have some empathy with that, and that sort of puts a lot of pressure on people in a quite a pressurized job and a pressurized thing. So what I want to go on to, so what is financial burnout, you know, and you know, why is it's sort of like the financial management important to preventing that burnout?
Oh, I love this topic. I obviously love this topic. So and I think the best people that describe it the best is Gallup Share Care. They are an American team, and they do a survey. They've been doing it for over 20 years, and they do an annual survey on people's lifestyle, people's life satisfaction, people's financial grace, ability to be able to make ends meet, people's so financial ability and grace, so lifestyle, life satisfaction. And they have now gone into the burnout piece, because what they found over the years is that you need 5 particular pillars of life to truly feel satisfied and to truly feel that your well-being, the totality of your well-being is being taken care of. And they are now beginning to go into that space, because WHO talks about burnout as a workplace issue. It's not a mental health issue, but it's a workplace issue. And it's an issue that occurs. Anybody can experience burnout. It's not just healthcare professionals. I know I focus on them, but it can be business owners. It can be self-employed people. You know, it can be people who are, you know, stay-at-home mums, and they've got a number of responsibilities. The issue is that there is unrelenting pressure. There is workload. There are time issues, time pressures that people are experiencing. There are things around having a lack of motivation for wanting to do the things that you're having to do, the responsibilities that you're having to do, taking care of all the different plates that you're spinning, essentially. And of course, in the workplace setting, there is something around culture. So they found that definitely line management and culture of the management makes a massive difference. So in the last couple of years, they've been looking at, well, we know from the share care surveys that we've been doing that you need these 5 pillars to be able to feel truly like you are doing a holistic approach to well-being. So how can we make sure that that's being brought in the workplace? And now they are recommending for employers, for managers, for leaders, for business owners, for even self-employed people, you need to think about all 5 of these areas, and they are your physical health. So I think most of us can imagine what is included in our physical health. Your community health. So how do you feel about the place that you live? And obviously from the workplace point of view, the place that you work. The career elements. Do you feel fulfilled at work? Your social elements, the relationships that you have. And of course, the big piece that I love, your financial elements. And obviously work is a massive part of how people get paid, how people pay their bills. And so if we don't address that, piece as well, we find that a lot of people will continue to be on that cycle of not being fulfilled, of having that risk of going into burnout, and then also at the same time having their own personal lives affected because the finances aren't where they should be. And I can obviously talk a little bit more about that personal finance piece as well.
Brilliant. So, you know, I guess what you're saying is that, you know, the finance is part of, and the finance could be related to, you know, money you've got coming in, the career you've got to do it, or where you're working, or whatever your situation is. And, you know, that's part of a holistic piece around your wealth, your well-being, your wealth and your well-being around that. So if that is missing, then there's going to be a bit of a disconnect, isn't there? So, you know, so what do people do? So, you know, we've established it's important. You know, what do we do next? You know, what are our responsibilities? What is the best thing to do?
That's a really, really good question. So some of the things it's important to pick out with finances is that phrase that I mentioned before, those two words about financial resilience. And we know as a result of the pandemic, particularly, that the people with lower financial resilience has really increased as a result of the pandemic. So there are some things that I recommend for employers, leaders, managers themselves to do. So if you're a business owner yourself, things that you can do, and I know things that I normally recommend for individuals themselves to do. I think one of the big things for employers or business owners, if you're in that place of influence where you're paying other people, it's definitely to be that person that champions financial education. You know, you've got to appreciate if people don't understand, and we must not take it for granted. I think one of the things for us as healthcare professionals particularly is because we're supposed to know a lot of stuff, and we know a lot of stuff, and we do know what we know, you know, yes, but there are certain areas, just because you're not necessarily given this level of training, education, literacy, even in the schools necessarily understanding how money works. So I think it's super important for employers to fill that gap of responsibility around payroll teams, how payroll works. I did a webinar, I think actually the first webinar I did to kind of launch Medics on Fire was on tax and IR35. It's still one of the most downloaded webinars that we have because people genuinely wanted to understand their tax position, IR35. We went through the pay slip and we had literally consultants, doctors, dentists, nurses, pharmacists on this session, and we went through the payslip, and a number of people were so grateful for it, just to explain to them their tax code. I think employers can have that responsibility. So if you're a business owner, you're employing people, think about how you're going to pay them and make it super streamlined as possible. I did this session recently, and one of the kind of operational managers said to me, oh, you know, payroll is a nightmare. And I said to him, if that's how you feel, imagine the people that you are paying, how they feel. So I think there is a responsibility in us in making it much more simpler for people to engage with, but then also making it much more simpler for people to understand. And then the second big thing I want to say for business owners and employers is if there are any financial benefits, make it known to people. I know it sounds like such a simple thing, but financial benefits might include, so again, I'm talking primarily around healthcare, but healthcare professionals, but again, I think it applies in a number of ways. So if there are particular discount codes that you know that NHS worker can have, car share schemes, the car lease options, you know, a number of people, I didn't know this until I was in a particular contract, on a substantive contract, and I didn't realize just how much was available to me just because of that contract, because nobody ever said it. And of course, as a GP, there aren't really benefits hanging around, so you don't know. And then I remember going for a role or considering a role with another provider, a private provider, and that provider actually supported their employees or the workers around getting a home closer to, because I think they're based in central London, closer to where they would work. So if that's something that you offer, is that something that you give to people, then let them know. Don't make assumptions that everybody knows about it. So those financial benefits, you never know. That might be the support to someone that's struggling. It's a personal finance thing, isn't it? About what car somebody's going to drive. You know, even if they can claim back mileage and fuel, etc. Let them know. Make it super, super easy. In terms of individuals, so for yourself, for your own personal finance and employees, definitely I have to say the education and literacy bit is super, super important. We have to take control. We have to understand our finances. The reason why it's financial independence, retire empowered is because I don't want people to put it off, till the end of their working lives. You know, when I'm 55, when I'm 60, I'm going to start looking, what exactly is happening to my pension? What exactly is happening? You know, from now, wherever you are, even if you've not done it up until that point, and you are 55, you are 57, it's not too late. Have an understanding of what's going on with your money. Take control of it. The charity Mind, I really love some of the work they do around this from my patient's perspective, because they know that there is a connection between mental health and obviously financial troubles. And unfortunately, financial troubles can cause you mental health issues. So that's worry, that's anxiety, that's panic, that's frustration, that's fear, that's avoidance, that's depression. And then obviously we know that some particular mental health issues can then perpetuate financial trouble. So things like someone who might have a bipolar disorder and be going through a manic phase. So they really show that connection quite well. But what I like about what they do is that they work with people, with their key workers, to actually face up to some of these things.
Yeah.
They support them around budgeting. They support them around opening up your bills. I do one-to-one with some of my clients. I'll tell you this, Dawn. And sometimes they tell me, Elizabeth, when my bills come in, I don't open them for a couple of weeks. And I'm like, it's not going to go away. It's not going to disappear just because you didn't open it. But the issue about that is around an element of fear, of anxiety. There's so much else. Overwhelm. I think overwhelm is probably the word. So I understand, I'm not saying it's easy. You might require some support and help to be able to do it, but I really want to encourage you to be in the know, become financially literate. And then the second thing I will say for us as individuals, as employees, is definitely get some financial advice. So I don't give financial advice. I do kind of the personal finance element. We look at savings, we look at budgeting, we look at ensuring that you understand the principles of financial independence. But when it comes to making certain decisions about how to make your money work better for you, how to sort out your pension, it might be sensible then to get an accountant on board, get a good financial advisor on board, really, really unpick your pensions and just make sure that it's all laid out to you and you know what's going to happen in the future or what's even happening now, how you can maximize your finances. So those are kind of two things I would give to both parties. And I think there is something we can do to help each other out.
Yeah, that's amazing, because I think, and what you've sort of demonstrated is that, again, the holistic piece around it, how the worry about it and can affect your mental health and well-being, and sort of like, and that worry could be something as simple as not opening the bills, which I'm very guilty of sometimes, because it's just one more thing that you have to deal with, and quite rightly, it's not going to go away, but it's sort of like when you're feeling overwhelmed, it's one less thing to deal with. And so what support do you in Medics on Fire sort of help people with this sort of issue? Because it's a life issue, really, isn't it? It's not, everybody has to do this in some way or form, because we all have resources or the things that keep us going. So it's a matter of sort of like, how does that fit in with our life? So how does it Medics on Fire sort of help people with that?
That's absolutely awesome. So what's really particular about us as healthcare professionals, and that's why I've tailored some of the support I give, is because we tend to be stable earners. And what I mean by stable earners is our careers are pretty much mapped out for us. Look at the pandemic, we were still called upon no matter what happens, even if there's war, we will still be needed. It's just a case of decision of whether or not you want to go on the front line or not. And you might even be conscripted to go on the front line should that happen. Hopefully never will in our lifetimes. But but what's really, really important about that is that then means that there is a little bit of complacency around our finances. So we automate a lot of things. We tend to be more attracted to people who are selling us products without us necessarily understanding the products. We tend to people who don't necessarily have the time and space to shop around and get the best deals. We also tend to people sometimes to have higher expenses because, of course, remember, we're still running families, we're still running our homes. We've still got family. We've still got all the other social norms that everybody else has. But then we've also got a huge responsibility caring for other people. So that means that we're more likely to put certain things in place that might be quite a bit of a financial burden, whether or not that's a huge mortgage, and whether or not that is taking kids to additional things. Not everything, it's not necessarily that it's a negative expense, but it might mean that we are typically taking on some of those higher expenses. We tend to be people that don't have any assets, and assets is what Kiyosaki talks about, it's income generating things that we put our money into. So we tend not, besides our pensions, we tend not to be in property, we tend not to have side businesses, we tend not to be investing in stocks and shares. And even if we do, we're super, super conservative. We don't want to take any risk, despite understanding that this is probably the years while you're working where you do want to take that little bit of extra risk. So what I do in Medics on Fire is I work through some of those fundamental money pillars. I work through money mindset with my clients. So we talk about, what is your money mindset? What is your big why? What is it that you want to achieve in your life? A lot of healthcare professionals are multifaceted. They have passions that they want to pursue, but you might never get to pursue those passions because you're working all the time. If you remember recently, the BMA survey in February, they released it kind of April, May this year. And they surveyed doctors every year, and they surveyed us post-pandemic, and they said, how are we feeling? And about 4,000 doctors responded, and over half of them, or almost half, are thinking about reducing their hours. And a quarter of doctors are thinking of actually leaving the career completely, and then about 1 in 5 want to leave NHS. And I think that's quite telling. Now, I can tell you that probably most of them will not be able to do so, Dawn, because they don't have an alternative stream of income, because they will have those bills. So unfortunately, they will need to continue on that